The number of Americans seeking unemployment aid is rising. Today, the Labor Department said that just over 857,000 workers applied for first-time jobless assistance last week. That's up 20,000 from the week before. Another 838,000 people filed new claims under the Pandemic Unemployment Assistance Program. The new federal initiative helps freelancers and part-time workers who normally aren't eligible for state benefits. Let's bring in Erica Pandey. She's a business reporter for Axios. Hi, Erica. Welcome. You reported this week that the number of unemployed Americans vastly outnumbers the number of open jobs in every single state. What parts of the country are especially hard hit right now?
Well, like you said, Elaine, the unemployment numbers have been trending down, but the number of unemployed Americans vastly outnumbers the number of jobs in every single state. And the states that we're seeing that have been hit the hardest are the states that have those big job magnet cities, like Illinois with Chicago, New York, Massachusetts, California. That's where, because these restaurants are closed, retailers are closed, a lot of people are still suffering. And then you have states like Hawaii and DC that actually have 46 and 40% respectively fewer job postings today than they did a year ago in 2019. And that's because those states have relied heavily on tourism, on foreign visitors, and that's all completely stopped as a result of the pandemic.
So with that being said, you touched on it. What industries are being hit the hardest?
Yeah, so, some industries are coming back. You're seeing warehousing and trucking, that support e-commerce and the stay-at-home economy sort of roaring back. But things like retail, things like restaurants are still suffering. Arts and entertainment and sports that rely on these large arenas and large in-person gatherings. And also, one thing that surprised me is that the effects are bleeding into these high-wage sectors that you can work from home with, like tech and finance. And that's because these companies are realizing that we're in this big recession, and they're realizing that they need to kind of tamper down their hiring outlook for the next year and beyond. So, no sector is immune to this and no state is immune to this. So America's unemployed really have nowhere to turn.
Interesting. Well, how much different will the overall job market look as jobs eventually start to come back then?
So there's just no understating the speed and the enormity of the impact here. The jobs outlook now, 6 months into this pandemic, is worse than the Great Depression still. And, a lot of the concern that economists talk about is that some of these furloughs and temporary job losses that seemed very temporary in April have already turned into permanent losses by now, and that is going to keep happening as even more restaurants close, as even more retailers and small businesses around the country close, because they just can't, weather this pandemic any longer.
Well, you also reported on people's feelings about returning to work. Do workers actually feel safe?
Yeah, this was a very interesting survey that came out from Edelman recently, and they looked at a lot of the economic health of the country is judged by the return to offices for workers who have been teleworking this whole time. And there is really a crisis of trust here. So only 14% of U.S. workers trust their CEOs to make the right decisions when it comes to reopening offices. There's very little consensus among office workers when it comes to social distancing and the necessity of masks and the necessity of sanitization stations. And a lot of this is because people have been hearing different information from the government, from their local governments, from their bosses, and people just don't know where to look and who to trust. And then on top of that, one, flashpoint that we see coming is that 43% of Americans say they wouldn't take a vaccine, but a lot of CEOs are hinging the return to work and the reopening of the workplace on the vaccine. So look for that to become a big, big issue in the coming months and beyond.